Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exo-terra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exo-terra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exo-terra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exo-terra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exo-terra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of CCR. We have so much going on in this episode, it's ridiculous. So just to make sure you all know at the onset, the topic of discussion tonight, a fan favorite in Colubrid world, Rhino Ratsnakes with the one, the only Rob Stone. Somehow we haven't done this on CCR, and the time was due. So that's our topic for discussion in about 40-45 minutes. But we're going to jump right into the science update because our friends at RGI have some pretty big announcements for us. We've been plugging their shed testing and snips. And so our science update, obviously brought by RGI, is actually being delivered to us today.
Yay, Colubrid tests!
Yay!
Yeah, let's go.
Welcome, Dr. Ben. Welcome, Kayla. So I'm not going to get in your way. I'm just going to let you guys take the stage and tell Colubrid Land the developments that have happened since Colubrid Fest.
Yeah, so as many of you know, we've had a Colubrid sex determination test for several years, and we've been saying since we were able to start doing morph testing in ball pythons that we're very interested in being able to do it in other species as well. And Colubrids was one of them, and it ends up that corn snakes are the first other species besides ball pythons. So Colubrids came in number 2 with corn snakes.
Love it.
Nice. Loving it.
Yes. So we have 4 morph tests for corn snakes as of right now. And there's some others, even other Colubrid species that we'll have here pretty quick. 2025 will be a very different year than our previous years. We've figured out some ways to make things faster and cheaper. Also, our prices have come down. So we started out 2.5 years ago with $65 per test. We dropped it to $50, and now we've dropped it to $40. So we have enough people buying tests. The more volume we have coming in, the cheaper we can do it. And so being able to offer tests for new people that keep corn snakes, probably didn't want to pay for ball python tests, but now we have those. And hopefully that means over time we can keep turning the prices down more and more. But we've got a amelanistic test. We've got lavender. We've got scaleless, and we've got terrazzo. Am I saying that right?
Terrazzo?
Terrazzo?
I know how to spell it.
Same.
2 R's, 2 G's.
Locality guy.
Yeah. Well, we got the test for it.
Somebody can tell us in the comments if I said it wrong. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want, when you say you have a test, I know most of our listeners know what that means, but there's definitely going to be some listeners that are like, well, what are you testing for? What does the test mean? So do you mind just kind of explaining, not necessarily the hardcore science, but just what this test enables you to do with your corn snake if you think it's amelanistic or wondering if it's amelanistic?
Yeah. So kind of the 2 main reasons you would want to test, let's take amelanistic, for example. You may have bred a het amelanistic to something, and so those babies are 50% possets. And so this would give you a chance to be able to run a test. You just send a small piece of shed in, like the size of a quarter is plenty. And we get that shed, we extract the DNA, and then we're able to use this test we've developed to be able to tell you which of the babies are het for albino, which aren't. Another thing you could do is you could go through your breeders and be like, okay, I know what these have, or I know there are things I know these have, but I want to find out if there's things hiding. And it might be because you want to use the things that are hiding, or it might be because you want to breed those things out. So maybe you don't want, some of your animals to be het for albino. And so you want to test your breeders and find out if there's some het albino hiding in there. And that way you can breed that out of your colony. So either way, these tests can help.
Awesome.
And if you're selling at shows, the difference between a for sure 100% het. Like the difference between a POS het and knowing for sure, literally having the sticker that says tested for RGI tested for AML. That's a huge difference. Or terrazzo, scaleless, because a lot of people are into that too. And lavender, of course. So,
and I'm so glad that you guys got lavender, because that's one that can kind of look like other things whenever you start getting, multiple. And that's what excites me too, is it's like, just starting to crack the surface of the colubrid genetic testing here, because one of my favorite things that I see, that offered for ball pythons is like your panel. When you have several. And I look, because I mean, like I said, you've got, for example, baby corn snakes, so many of them look alike. It's so hard to determine what genes are there, or, wait a year. You got to grow them for a year before you can really see what some of these are. Where I'm so looking forward to the panels, when that ends up coming out and being able to go, all right, what the hell am I looking at here? What all's in this guy? So that's really exciting, and so glad that it's starting to happen.
Yes. And same if you get a fancy corn snake from PetSmart or off the Craigslist or something like that. Yeah, that'll be a good tool. And all of the online things, I know Facebook groups be like, what do you think this is? And this will give you an opportunity. Now we've got 45 morphs that we can test for in ball pythons in our panel. I think we're right about 50 altogether, but 45 in the panel. And so hopefully we can do that for corn snakes and for hognose and for, all these other species that we have morphs for. We'll keep working towards that.
Yeah. It's funny because I think one of the jokes in the hobby is, I don't know if normal corn snakes exist anymore in the hobby.
Honestly,
because even if it looks normal, it's het something.
Yes.
Because of how the breeding is played out. So it's going to be really exciting to clean some of that up. So
and we found out and we found out in the ball python world that, like, I mean, there are some people who are coming back, like, especially after the panels, there will be like, they can have like 4, 5, 6 different hets that they weren't expecting. And so I kind of expect that out of the corn snake world too, as we start to get more. Because I mean, some of these lines are decades old, just like the ball python. So I'm excited for that. And when you order these tests, like as soon as we roll them out, we've been trying to have every single one of these tests immediately available as a fast test, which means that from the moment we get your shed in the mail, that means like 24 to 48 hours or 1 to 2 business days, you have the results.
Oh, that's incredible. And do you want to tell everybody where to go to be able to submit these and how that process looks?
Ben, you want me to do that, or you want to?
Go ahead.
Sure. It's going to be on Morph Market for this. We are only just working through one vendor. So either you go to our website, raregeneticsinc.com, or go to Morph Market. And if you select the genetic testing section, there will be a panel just like, there's lots for ball pythons. And then there's a section for other species. You'll see corn snakes. And you can just order right through there. It'll send you, you can place your order for whatever test you want. They will send you the instructions and where to mail it in. So it's very simple and streamlined. You just go to Morph Market like you'd be picking up an animal, but instead you're going through the genetics testing. So real easy.
Yeah. So I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
Do you do the lab work, Ben? Are there technicians that do the lab work?
Yes.
Both?
The answer is yes.
So now that we're 2.5 years in, it certainly took time to build, but now this is kind of how it was set up when I was in, industry working for a pharmaceutical company. I'm essentially the R&D department. It's pretty much just me. So when I'm developing new tests, that's just me doing that part. I figure it out and get it working really well. And then there are a couple of technicians in Texas that have been trained. Allie, she's been on our show once or twice, I think. And then there's a new girl, I believe her name's Haley, but she's just getting trained. In Texas, once they're figured out, and I did check with them, they just got all 4 of the tests for corn snakes. So they're officially ready to go. So if, like Kayla was saying, a shed shows up, those for paid tests, those are going to go to Texas. So the PO box that they'll get once you pay, you'll get a 4-digit or I think it's a 5-digit
ID
order number.
Mm-hmm.
And then each shed gets a 3-digit shed ID. And then that way, once they get it in Texas, they know immediately what order it's from. And then each shed has its own individual. And then so that we don't have to type in really long names, it's just a 3-digit code. And then that way we report it back. So when we report it back, it'll automatically send you an email and say, okay, shed ID, blah, blah, blah is this. And, just list out however many are in your order.
Nice.
And so the plan is to develop more corn tests, correct?
Oh yeah, lots.
Oh yeah.
Very, very cool. Any idea when you're heading on to the hognose front?
So I think things will be a little different this year. With ball pythons, we were kind of working through morph after morph. Now that we've gone through ball pythons, we kind of know the hot spots where to look, where these morphs are, and a lot of them are similar in rats and in zebrafish and blah, 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 but now we know specifically in ball pythons where to look. So what you might see here pretty quick is like we do AML and lav and scaleless in corns, but then we might do that, AML in like, king snakes and milk snakes and hognose. So that might be more the approach we'll take. But I don't know for sure yet. But that's kind of cool. We'll have several with that same axanthic, things where you see it in many different species. We might attack it that way. But in 2025, I would imagine we'll have corns, we'll have hogs, and then we may have, a few others that have common morphs. Rats. I was talking to Kayla today about a rat snake morph that I'll probably have pretty quick here. So it might, instead of being in one species, trying to find as many morphs in that one species, now it'll be more, okay, we know where to look. Let's look in those places in a bunch of different species and see what we can get tests developed for as quick as we can.
That's very cool. Well, we are very proud of the fact that you sponsor our science update. So this is amazing that, it went from an idea, now it's come to fruition. I mean, I live in the world of academia and nothing is fast. Things are ideas for 2 years before we get them onto a freaking piece of paper. So the mere fact that this was just September and now it's February, and we've got the test, that's pretty freaking amazing. So thank you for supporting us. And I really
likewise. Also in 2025, we finally get an identity test for indigos at least. That's also still being worked on. And there's people I know that watch your show and they keep asking every once in a while, so how's it going? Like, we are still working on it. It's tough. We now are pretty good at telling if we have a sample come in, we can tell a Texas apart from an Eastern. But we want to get that more zoomed in so we can tell individuals apart from each other. And it's just not clean yet, but we are working on it. So lots of good stuff to come in 2025 for colubrids.
Awesome. And as a reminder to everyone, keep sending in your sheds.
Yes, please.
That's needed in order for us to get these. And, especially when it's newer, I mean, really at this point, I guess any morph, but it doesn't matter how popular it is, how rare it is, just send all of them, get those in because, RGI is going to need them to be able to pull that data.
Yes.
All righty. Well, Ben's got to head on out and put his kids to bed. So
got to make sure I don't get in too much trouble.
Oh no, I know that life.
Yes,
happy life.
It sounds familiar.
So much, and very, very proud to be a part of what you all are doing, and love seeing it. Love Colubrid Fest last year, and from what I'm hearing, it sounds like this year is going to be even bigger and better.
Oh yes,
yes. I think you might be giving a talk, Ben, if you remember.
Ooh, you are.
Yeah,
that's right. It's been announced now.
Yeah,
awesome. One of our speakers.
That's actually right. Announced. So there you go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, cool.
Nice.
Well, now you have to come. So there you go.
Yeah, of course.
I would love to.
We just made it CCR official. So.
It's official. All right.
Done.
All righty, sir. Well, thank you.
All right.
And have a good night. And this is super, super exciting.
Yeah.
But Kayla's going to stay on. We're going to finish up our science update because
Kayla, cool thing.
Clint and I, we all talk throughout the week. And first of all, the snake she found is amazing. It's Carphophis meanus, the worm snake. I love them. They're dipsadids for my uber snake nerds out there. Nobody really keeps them. But so tell the origin of this animal, and then I will bring up one of the videos.
Yes. Chinese tongue flicks.
Here, I'm gonna. Sorry. Volunteers were yakking in the background, so I'm gonna mute it. There we go. So, context. So in addition to working for RGI, I also work for a wildlife hospital in my town. I've been there for about a year. And so I very basically, like, from the get-go, I walked in and they were like, "Congrats, you're our snake expert." And I was like, "What?" So that was fun. So that being said, on Friday, we got a call from a terrified woman who said, "Hey, there's a snake in my house. I thought it was a worm. It's under a cup. I'm terrified. Please save me." And I was like, "Okay, it's fine. Send me a picture." And I get a picture of this eastern worm snake, which I expected to be larger, until pest control saved this woman and brought this tiny snake to us in a Chinese takeout box. And of course, it's 3 inches long. It weighs all of 0.88 grams.
Wow.
Teeny tiny baby worm snake. It was the first Carphophis I've seen in person. And oh my gosh, I was over the moon, like just absolutely over the moon with how cute this thing is. And he had some stuck shed. And because it's also very cold, we decided that, it's probably best that we don't stick him out in the cold. I think we had like a warm spell. That's probably what brought him out. And when it started to cool down again, he went into this lady's basement. So we're like, he can just overwinter with us. We'll have a pet box of dirt in the reptile room. It's fine. Yeah. And come May 1st, when it's legal to re-release our little guys, we do that. But this video here that we're about to show was something that I found on Sunday. So I figured this little guy is probably still coming out of brumation, but on the off chance, like, he's small, I'm less familiar with the species, but just on the off chance he has been awake a little bit longer than expected, I'm gonna mince up a very unfortunate earthworm and see if I can get him to eat a little bit. It's very unlikely, but what's the harm? What's the harm unless you're the earthworm? So so I did that. I get him to, I offer it to him. He runs away. So, I kind of pick him up, put him near the earthworm, see if maybe I could coax out a feeding response. And this little guy, he flops out onto the dirt like twice. He's like, nope, not cool, not about it. And he starts to burrow himself partially under the dirt. And then this happens. He starts to wiggle his tail. He's partially buried, and that tail, it's like he's doing a caudal lure, like you'd see in a baby copperhead or a baby cottonmouth, except he's doing it defensively. And I have never seen anything like this in any snakes. And
I've done, so scientist.
Yes.
Sitting on his couch, eating pizza during whatever time of day that was. This was my birthday weekend, and my wife kept yelling at me, telling me, "Stop working." I was like, okay. Thanks for the birthday love. And then I looked at this video with that little tail waggle and lost my damn mind. So, because there are snakes that do this as a defensive strategy, where they, and if you can't see the video because you're driving in your car, basically this little worm snake neonate has its tail up out of the substrate, which is interesting, wiggling it. And lots of snakes do that to basically draw attention away from their head. But the degree of wiggle is what makes this kind of cool. So I've already started looking into it, and this might be the first CCR note because with Kayla, because that is a very unique behavior. So if you're listening and you know worm snake biology, first of all, you need to be my friend if you know worm snake biology. Yes. But and you've heard of them doing this, let me know. Reach out. But Kayla and I are going to be moving forward with a nice little either herp review note for new behavior for a relatively common snake on the East Coast. But this is just proof that keeping your eyes peeled and every now and then bringing something like a freaking worm snake into captivity for a little while can lead to a pretty novel little discovery. So very cool.
He did that for probably, because I like when he started doing that, I like picked up the little, it's like a critter keeper that we have him in. And I walked up to one of the other staff. I was like, look at this. And he was doing it for like a straight 2 minutes at first. And then someone was like, that's really cool. You should record it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So then I go and record this last little bit. But he was doing it for a hot minute. It was amazing. And it's very dramatic for just like that tiny centimeter of tail that's out. So so cool.
So fun little observation in the middle of freaking February, and you're in Virginia. Like, yes, I'm very jealous because there's no snakes coming out anytime soon here in West Virginia. It's icing right now, which is a special type of winter hell. So, anywho, but no. All righty. Yeah, well, thank you, Kayla, for coming on. We are, like I said, very proud of our RGI sponsorship.
Absolutely.
And have to come on whenever you have more tests.
Oh, you know it. I will be.
Okay. Very good.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Have a wonderful night.
You too.
See ya.
Bye-bye. All right. So we still have so much more to talk about. So I'm not going to do any kind of update. We'll do that later. Science update done. Clint's been busy today.
Yes, I have. I'll tell you what, I'll start out with, we'll do the market update and then move into a couple other pieces. So this is the first market update of the month. So we're talking numbers of February. We're going to go into some numbers here, and then I will talk about what I've seen over the past couple months and really over the past month, I guess. Let me add this to the screen. So, okay, we're looking at a graph here of ball python listings as well as total listings. And really what I'm looking at, I'm going to kind of point out this portion here, February of last year to this portion here. And this is just ball pythons I'm looking at. In short, we're talking February of last year. I want to say that's somewhere around 40, probably 42, 43,000 that are listed. And then this year, we're now under 40,000 listed at the same time. So we're talking roughly about I'm going to guess somewhere around a 3,000 ball. I got the numbers right down here, don't I? Actually, almost 5,000 drop. So we've got 38,365 listed as of February this year versus 43,102 listed last year. Total listings, all snakes combined, 53,823 versus 57,259 last year. So we see, again, about 3,400 snake drop compared to last February. So all in, fewer snakes on the market compared to this time last year. To me, that's kind of a good thing because this is the time of year we should see the dip continuing. So it shows, in my opinion, we're either having fewer produced or more bought or both. So again, all in positive trend for what we're looking for right there. Let me see how I can keep moving this. Where are we at? There it is. All right, next. Whoa. Lost it. Hit the wrong button, guys. Okay. Next up, we've got colubrid listings. And remember, compared to what we were tracking last year, now we're breaking it down into the various categories of colubrids per listener's request. We saw some decent movement here too. We've got hognose, which continue to dominate, and I'll break that down by percentage in just a moment. But it's moved down a little bit. Currently, we've got 3,104 hognose listed, but that has come down from last month. Corn snakes, also same thing. They're trending down, 2,035 listed. As we pop down here, we've got king snakes, slight decline, currently 1,229 listed. We did see, what do we have here? I believe that's rat snakes. Rat snakes were the only colubrid category that did increase, and they're currently at 478. Let's see, bulls, pines, gophers. I've combined all those into one category. Pits, we've got 300 pits all in. currently listed. House snakes, 176, and that was going down as well. And then finally, we've got garters, and we only have 53 garters that are currently listed. So super tiny. All others, we've got 167 listed, but let's kind of look at some comparisons here. You can see the trend lines. We continue to go down. One of the things I mentioned, and I'm glad that it's proving what I thought, with the exception of one. So back in November, I talked on Black Friday, I expected to see November to December really decline fast, and we didn't. But I thought that may be because a lot of the sales hadn't fully processed. Like on Morph Market, it doesn't get shipped out. I'm sorry, it doesn't ship right away, so it doesn't get pulled off of Morph Market. But if you see, there's that rapid decline in corn snakes from December to today. We were looking at a little over 2,500 listed in November. We're down to right at 2,000 now. So about a 500 drop in just that 2-month stretch. 2.5 months, I guess. So we saw a slight spike from November to December with hognose, but now it's declining as well. So it's kind of following predicted patterns. But as we get over here, we want to look at market share, colubrid market share, the whole shebang. Here's some of the numbers. So the market share is still looking about the same as what it did last month. Ball pythons are at 71%, which, as we know, has moved down about 6 points from where it was at its peak last year. Colubrids holding steady at 15%. Boas at 10%. Other pythons at 4%. The big movers really, so all in from January to February, the market dropped 1.4%. So 1.4 points below where it was before. That's a change of 617 snakes. Excuse me, that's ball pythons, not total. Total actually increased, and I'll talk about that in a second. Other pythons, those increased 160, so 0.3 point increase. Boas, big time movement here. Boas have an additional 1,048 animals listed compared to last year. So I guess there's a lot of litters that's dropped, that are feeding, hitting. We may have had, because I don't think we had imports come in, during the weather we've had, but so that increased 1.9 points. Colubrids down 367 from last month, again as expected, 0.7 point decrease. So all in, the entire snake listings increased 224, so 0.4 points, but that's really being driven hard by the boas, because mostly everything else was moving.
What? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Why?
The only thing, like I said, the only thing I can think of is if boa litters were already dropping, which could very well be the case, because there's really nothing else that explains that, in my opinion. Again, there are a lot of boa species that are imported, but a lot of importers aren't putting individual animals up for sale. There are a few, but I highly doubt someone took the time to post 1,000. You know what I mean? Even just a few hundred is highly doubtful from an importation perspective. So that's got to be a litter piece, in my, is what I'm thinking. Now, keep in mind that's rosy boas. That's all boa species are lumped into that category. The expanse of the colubrid market. So hognose are now up to 39% of the listed colubrids. I mean, they are hands down, dominating. You've got corn snakes at 26%. We've got kings at 15. Excuse me. Milks at 6. Rat snakes at 6. Bulls, pines, and gophers all combined together. So Pituophis all in at 4%. House snakes, 2%. Other colubrids, so anything else, 2%. And now we have garters that are down to below 1% of what's listed. And I'm telling you, that's the sleeper category right there. People have asked me if there's going to be there's so much room. You can pick any one of those categories if you were looking for a species or something to get, to breed, to enjoy, and that there will be marketability on. But if you're asking for where there's going to be the biggest pop, it's going to be garters. There are so many nice ones that, exist there. And if you set garters out on your table, it's just going to be you. It's so very few and far between that you see garters at shows, or you may see one, type. So I'm telling you, that's the market right there that I do think there is a lot of headway to make. So pretty cool stuff. Now, talk a little bit more about, what we've seen. So I was talking to Mickey just earlier today. Of course, Mickey and the Show Me Reptile Show and Show Me Marketplace sponsor our market update, and we are always super grateful for that. But we're talking about really what we're seeing, across the board. And I mentioned on the last episode the January lull. We see that January lull that kind of takes place. And for me, it was very nerve-wracking because, as I wouldn't have had a problem if I wasn't spending so much money to open the second one, right? Because it's expected. And even though I felt like it was so slow and we weren't hitting the budgeted numbers that I set for us. Now, I guess I should take that back. For the past few weeks, we've been hitting them for a week, but we hadn't caught up what we lost to budget on the year because of the 2 winter weather events that hit us. Now, with that being said, if you're a leader in any kind of retail industry, I hope you have this same belief that I do. Weather does not prevent the need or the want. It only delays it. Okay, so know that it's not going to eliminate, that those sales. It just delays them. And so that's why I was starting to is getting irritating for me, because we should have caught it by now. So I was looking at our budgets, and this past weekend, we had a big one. Saturday's budget was big, especially compared to what we've been seeing through the weeks. It was, part of me was thinking, there's no ramp up. There's no build up to this. It's boom. And there's some, macro events that we probably need to address. And that is right now, the political climate and all the changes that are happening with the new administration. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. That's not what we're talking about. What I mean, though, is with the big shifts that are taking place and the big things going out there, it's causing a tension with consumers. You have half the population happy, half the population scared. But anytime there's tension or nervousness on what comes next, the population is afraid to use their money. They got to hold it because you got to be prepared for whatever the hell is about to happen. So, that was part of what was in my mind on, is this why I'm not seeing the rapid, increase? Our prices, there's prices that are already high out there on, eggs, and we hear that all the time. We're afraid of what's going to happen with products if tariffs, do get put into place. So there's all this consumer nervousness, with that, I was really scared to see what was going to happen this past Saturday. But true to cycle, true to form, not only was it a huge day for us here at Metazotics, it was a huge day, for us here at Metazotics. So we almost doubled that budget that I was afraid that we could even get close to. So it certainly helped, with the year, and it reassured me that the cycle is still there, that, the trends are still coming. And what it looks like is now, and that, I don't think that's tax money yet. That's just pent up demand is what happened there. So tax money is going to be hitting within the next week to 2 weeks. And that's when I do see it's elevated, and it stays elevated for the next several months. So everything that I've been saying as far as how you can capitalize on that still remains true. Get your animals photographed, get them posted now, because it's about to come. And you're at this point, most places, you may not have clear shipping, but you have shipping windows.
Oh yeah.
You're going to have, exactly, where it's, like this week, I'm like, shipping's out for me this week. It's not going to work. Next week, we're probably right back to where we need to be able to get stuff out. So take advantage of it. Okay. There's the market update. Thank you. Next, we've got a quick Colubrid Fest update. while talking to Mickey today, we should have, within 48 hours of this recording, if all goes to plan, we should have a hotel block. Now, that hotel block is going to be shared with our vendors first. So know that. That hotel block, because it's going to initially be probably a chunk of 50. We'll see. Maybe more. But that initial block, we're going to roll out to the vendors so that the vendors will have first crack at that. Sorry for our attendees. Nothing, that's just got to take care of the people who are, having to spend the big money to make sure that we can put on the big show. After that, we'll announce for everyone, and we will probably go above and beyond the Chamber of Commerce and what they get, and see what else we can lock in addition to that for everyone. In short, it's typically not necessarily a discounted rate. It's just they hold the rooms for
that's what they did last year.
Yeah. So, but luckily where we're going, the rates aren't terrible at all. They're in Fort Wayne. So we definitely should be golden. With that came a different conversation with another individual. And I'm happy to announce that CCR and Colubrid Fest both have a new sponsor. And if you are watching on YouTube, you probably can guess who that is. It's right there in the bottom right-hand corner, and that is ReptiChip. Exactly. And, ReptiChip is something that you and I have both brought up a few times over the past few months, because we both utilize it in different ways for colubrids. And I was talking to JT today. JT is the owner of ReptiChip. Great guy. He's been fantastic to us here at Metazotics from the start. And I love getting to chat with him out at Tinley all the time. So we were talking today, and, really we just discussed, ReptiChip is huge for ball pythons, for, really the python market, as a whole. And we utilize it for different colubrid species, but we don't think it's really been introduced to the colubrid, segment the way that it should. And it's again, we don't come on and talk about products that we don't believe in. And this is one that we use. It's one, I just got another pallet today. Whenever I called him, he was afraid that I was calling with a problem on the pallet. Everything's good. Everything's fine. But part of this discussion, is because he had messaged saying that he wanted to talk, and he had some cool things that he wanted to run by us. And in short, it's ReptiChip has been working on some new mixes, some new products that he really wanted us to get our hands on. So there's a tropical terrarium mix. There's a temperate terrarium mix. There's a basically kind of like ABG for those who are familiar with that. And there's also some select bioactive base components that they've been currently working on. And what what ReptiChip is going to do is they're going to send these new products to West Liberty. They're going to send some to Metazotics. We're going to get to work with them, see, to try some different species on them, and really see what we like and what, if there's anything that needs to be adjusted, changed. So it goes to that statement that we keep making on how excited we are that these companies continue to invest to bring new product out that advances the husbandry, that of the animals that we're taking care of and caring for. And in fact, another cool thing during this conversation is JT wants to find that aspen alternative.
Yeah.
And I know your feelings on aspen, and I would love to have something. I know you don't. And I use so much of it, on different things. And, so it's not, when we think ReptiChip, we only think of, the humidity holding aspect. But they're working on other pieces to expand those lines. And it's so exciting. And, I want to thank JT. I want to thank ReptiChip. And, at this point, I feel we've now rounded out with such great companies to align with, with Show Me, with RGI, with ReptiChip, and of course, our show sponsor right out of the gate, Exo-terra, who's done wonderful for us. And we believe in what they all do. They support, and they're all jumping in to help the colubrid community in, everywhere they can. So very cool.
I've talked about it multiple times. trying to figure out an incubation medium that I can use with the students at school, because I learned with former interns, not Derek, and there's an inside joke there, was not Derek. Anyway, that, kind of trying to do the vermiculite perlite with a beginner was problematic, to say the least. And I don't know what the hell it is, but the ReptiChip was like the perfect incubation medium. And one of the things I love about it is when those little blocks or chunks or the right moisture, you can see it. Like it changes that little bit of color. And so there's a visual element that you don't get with other substrates when you're trying to dial in where you want it to. Like when it's too wet, it looks really kind of that dark maroony red. When it's just right, it's just kind of a golden brown. It sounds like I'm describing cereal. But at the same time, though, if you've worked with this, you know it. So yeah. I'm actually pumped. And as we all know, I have a love affair with dirt now. So substrates are something that I am completely geeked to work with. And a temperate mix, that just sounds very cool to me.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, for me, I use a lot of the Repti Earth because I found I like that better than sphagnum moss in my nest boxes. Yeah. It's some sphagnum moss molds, and it's they can crap in it. And you can't always tell, and it's but with the Repti Earth, I mean, it's easy to check. Does it need to be sprayed down? Is it too humid, not humid enough? And if they do crap, it's easy to see. So just a lot of good stuff, and I'm really glad that they've come on board. So, so we thank them and look forward to working with them. So,
yes, thank you. Okay. All right, did we somehow manage to do all of that still on time?
Yeah, I think we've skipped our general updates, and that's okay. I mean, to put it in a nutshell, Zac is probably angry with someone at the university because the kids have driven him nuts. That's probably happened. I'm old and tired. That's probably happened. So that's our typical updates. We'll go ahead and just spin that out there.
And Clint sent me 10 hognose snakes,
something like that. How many? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Which, I decided to set those up here at the house. So they're in quarantine as we speak. But
here, Zac, breed these and just send
big Clint. Yes. It was nice to just get a bunch of adult hogs that kind of had no strings attached, and then I get to breed them, and when they pop out of their eggs, I just ship them all to you. I don't have to deal with any babies. I hate dealing with the babies. I'm learning that.
See, and on my end, I was like, is the only thing we have in that rack hognose? Like, yeah. So if I send all those hognose to Zac, we can just shut that rack down. We don't have to feed anything in there. We don't have to do anything that's eliminate that rack. Yeah. All right, I'm going to see when Zac can take these hognose.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Worked out beautifully.
Yes, it did. Okay, are we ready to bring Rob on?
Let's do it. I'm looking forward to chatting with him.
So this is our second repeat guest. We've only done this. We did this with Owen with the 50th episode.
Third.
And so bringing to the stage.
Third.
Sorry, we had Kayla.
Yes.
Jesus. Sorry, Kayla. She's going to bust my... Shame on me. Third repeat guest, Rob. So here we go. Boom. To the stage, to the screen, to your ears, depending on how you're consuming this. We have Rob Stone,
Welcome,
fellow
Rob.
Morelia Python Network podcast host. Last time, I think you were kind of the pitch hitter for all the podcasts as needed. I don't know if Bows existed when we did the first recording with Aurea Cryptophis or the Bamboo Rats at that time.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but so Bows, and on a more regular basis, Reptile Fight Club stepped in for Chuck about 13, 14 months ago, and it's been really good. We've been more or less on every week, but I think he came out to we've done 35, 36 shows over that time. So, and which has been great. So,
very cool.
Yeah.
So we had you on initially to do Bamboo Rats, and that was back when Matt was the co-host. And I distinctly remember talking with Matt about we got to bring on Bob Rock. We got to bring on Rob. That's going to get me all night long. And he said explicitly, but I don't want him to talk about Rhino Rats because he always talks about Rhino Rats. And I think he even said that to you. But subsequently, we've dabbled with rhinos. You know, we've had guests where they talk about some of the species they keep, then we kind of go to the rhinos. But Clint and I were talking, and we have not had the straight down the chute rhino discussion. It's no secret. We'll just get this out of the way right now. I'm on Team Bear and I, but Rob actually called me out on that once, which was really funny to me. I was like, why are you even giving this oxygen? And I thought, why am I giving this oxygen? So thank you for doing that. So Barons to the side. I bow down to the Rhino Rats tonight. So with that being said, yeah. So basically, rhinos are cherished in the colubrid community. I thought we would just kind of do the history of rhinos, some taxonomy of rhinos, and then cover care of rhinos, the CCR way, if you will.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Well,
sweet.
can we start, because although that Rob's been on before, it's been a while. So I think we should just start at the beginning, because it's not. I'm sure we have listeners who are listening today that haven't listened to all of the older episodes. So with that in mind, can you kind of tell us how you started, man? How'd you get into reptiles to begin with?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I've talked about, talking about it over the course of whatever going on, or being involved with podcasts for going on, 14 years, I guess, in terms of listening heavily to MPR going on. I think the first episodes that I had done were on Reptile Radio when it was CK as the host. I think I went on twice over the summer, and that would have been 2000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 10 or 11, something like that, right? I've had, various things have come to mind. So I don't know that I have a super clear story. I'm sure it's the classic. I definitely like dinosaurs and stuff. In terms of inspirational things that stick out to me would be when I was a kid, I had turtles. When I lived in Hungary, we definitely had little, dime store, even, going 20 years after it was prohibited. In Hungary, you could get them in the same way that you could here in the 50s and 60s. So I definitely had a whole tank full of red ear sliders, quarter-size red ear sliders, that sort of deal. And then around that, when I was certainly mid-single digits somewhere, I definitely went on an airplane. I think I must have been going to my grandmother's house, something like that. And someone had a critter keeper with a corn snake. That they were just as their carry-on item was a critter keeper with a corn snake. As bizarre as that sounds nowadays, right? And so I remember being fascinated by that. My mother's friend who lived in Cleveland had a large boa. And I did find the actual printed out photo of me as probably 5 or 6 years old, holding this probably 6-foot boa. I love it. Got it wrapped around the neck. I am kind of giving it the throttle on the neck or whatever, but I have, totally this happy face and all this stuff. And I remember that distinctly. And she was mostly into, she had a lot of Eastern fox snakes and super cool kind of stuff,
cool.
But so that was probably the front end. The first snakes that I had, and I don't remember which was first, but was a mall pet store, baby Colombian boa that, of course, was infested with mites. I was keeping it on AstroTurf with the hot rock, this whole thing.
Nice.
And in light of all that, it was super short-lived. Obviously, mites, especially a mite infestation on a newborn boa, that's a problem. And with a couple small exceptions, that's the only boa constrictor I think that I've properly owned and intended to keep for a long time. Yeah.
Huh.
So that was kind of a false start. In terms of colubrids, first colubrid I had, someone had brought into school a T-positive albino Western terrestrial garter snake. So that mutation of those is occurs within the with another Colorado mutation or whatever, but it's known from a specific water feature in Denver, in town. And so this was just a random homozygous T-positive albino that had been born in someone's basement, speaking to the kind of rate of appearance within the population, right? It wasn't finding a het that was then produced out of or whatever. Scott Felser had that mutation. So that's sort of very vestigially out there. I know you were talking about garter snakes in terms of the market update and all those things. They could be from somewhere else too, but certainly the T-positive albino vagrans is a Denver snake, which is cool. Interesting. And I had that one for several years, so that did really well. So vagrants to me hold a real special place in my heart. I still not tired of finding them, seeing them, and all that. So
nice, very nice.
Very cool. So that was your first colubrid, you said, right?
First colubrid for sure.
Now,
and
go ahead.
No, so so this probably puts us at the latter stages of the 90s. Around that same time, then, Robin and Chad had moved. They had been in warehouse space up in Boulder. They opened up the shop off Broadway in Denver, and that was kind of when I was really expanding my interest in things. So I definitely went in there often in terms of when the store was open. The store had closed by the time I started working there. I worked there in high school, and then between high school and college, and then I guess again, I'm trying to think, either 2 or 3 times. So I definitely know that crew. Those folks have been hugely influential to me, and that was opened a whole new world in terms of from Pro Exotics. There's the Bushmaster connection, and then I started volunteering out at Denver Zoo. So lots of local Colorado things that then turned into a whole much broader world, and that would probably be in the early 2000s. And as I always say, there hasn't been a day that's gone by since 2000 that I haven't thought about reptiles. So
nice, very, very cool.
Very, very cool.
And I tell you, kind of jealous that you had access to a place like that, Pro Exotics, that would have so many different species, come in. No surprise that bamboos are something you can talk about, as they were the ones who were bringing in, so many. My first pair of cockeye, that's where I got them from, was from Chad at one of the Tinley shows. For those of you that don't know who we're referring to, we're talking about Chad Brown and Robin Markland, who started originally Ship Your Reptiles, and Chad still has that. Robin has since moved on and started Redline Shipping. So they had Pro Exotics, which unfortunately had a fire that came through and wiped out the entire facility at one point. Very sad time. But so you guys have an idea on, who Rob's referring to, and really the kind of, I guess, the variety that you had access to and got to work with. So that had to be quite an experience for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to say one thing real quick about Chad Brown. So I am an hour from Pittsburgh, and he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay. And I was in high school, and my dad and I have a wonderful relationship. But he grew up on a farm in Western Pennsylvania and did not know how to handle a nerd. Like this was a problem. He was a great, still is. He's still with us. And I distinctly remember being on the couch back in high school, and Chad Brown was playing, and I had Reptiles magazine and knew that he owned, Pro Exotics at the time. And I was like, he owns a reptile shop, Dad. And he was like, well, who are you talking about? Chad Brown. And then I just rattled off all this stuff, and it was like, I wish I could have recorded my dad. Like my dad was like, he knows something about a football player. So anyway, that's just always been super special to me. My first Tinley, I got a picture with Chad, told him that story and sent it to my dad. So yeah, that's my time. Anyway.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think there was either connections like that, or just even sort of a, it gave a credibility, right, to people who aren't interested in reptiles. It certainly, I think, had an impact in that way. I had actually, the last time I'd worked for him was before I went to law school at Michigan State, and I had moved back the summer before the fire. So I went out there that morning, in terms of looking through all those tubs and things. So yeah, Clint, what you're talking about, I was there, I saw it, I smelled like burned plastic for a week. It was something for sure. And that, that really hit hard as a a space that I had worked in for a long time, and just opening these tubs on snakes that I had taken care of, that would have been, for sure where those cocci got from Chad, from those animals, depending on the year, those might have been ones that I had hatched out, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, gosh. Well, after that, I mean, because I could see where something like that can really, kind of take the wind out of the sails, and make you not even want to, experience anything along those lines again. So what was your next steps? Where did you go from there? What, what did you start? What were you keeping at home during these years? That's another question. Like, people ask me now, so what do you keep at home? And I'm like, nothing. Nothing. I take that back. We now have the, red spotted garters for Dex, my son. But other than that, nothing, because I've got so much I'm dealing with, daily at the shop.
Yeah. I think the things that, really appealed to me at that time, well, so the first thing is kind of this would be in 2001 or 2002, Pro Exotics wanted to get out of their rhino rats. And at this point, my buddy Tom Weaver, who at that time was working at the Denver Zoo, ultimately became the curator or assistant curator of herps there, and now is at the Sonoran Desert Museum in that capacity. Before I had gone away to college, I had brought all my animals over to his place. Effectively, we sort of combined our collections, which at that point would have been mostly pythons. But I remember, it would be fall of probably 2001, maybe 2002. Pro Exotics wanted to get rid of their rhinos. They were having a lot of trouble with skin blisters associated with them, which we can get into, and kind of what causes that, maybe ways to avoid that. I don't think it's not actually inherent to the animals. It's kind of the way they were being kept and this sort of stuff. Nevertheless, it turned into Robin and Chad saying, hey, so we have 15 of these that we want to sell. And so Tom and I together bought all those animals. So it was like 5 pairs of adults and maybe an additional 5 kind of grow outs, yearling 2-year-olds. And we then went to Daytona the next year, and I think we sold a pair of those adults, a pair or 2 pair of those adults, and it paid for the whole project. And that was kind of our big sort of starting point in that. And so, and I've had them ever since. So that, since whatever that was, 2001 or 2002, when we got that group, I've had them at home. I'd worked with them a little bit at Pro Exotics before that, but that was really kind of my front end with them in terms of, I suppose when I went to college, there would have been then 8 months or so that I didn't have them physically in hand. And then save that, I've had at least one of those in my house every day for, the subsequent 22, 23 years.
Nice.
My goodness. This is just kind of a goofy question, but it's something I like to ask. Why rhinos?
I think so it started, I think, going back to, honestly, so Reptiles Magazine was big to me. I think, Clint, you've talked about this, in terms of from really, when I would have been looking at it, would probably be like the 96 issues forward.
95 on is what I had.
Yeah, that's the real quality, so it was always kind of like, it was from 93 or whatever, but really kind of what was presented in there went up a notch in the mid 90s. And I remember it would probably be 90, certainly. So Pro Exotics, one of the cool things, they put out these crazy ads that had a list around the corner of all the different things that they were working with, to some capacity, right? Some of it might have been resale from Cameron, other stuff that they were trying to breed, all these different things, and all these cool pictures and all this stuff between a half page or a full page and whatever. And certainly rhinos, I think they would have gotten them from Klaus Schultz through Cameron in probably the spring of 98. And so once they got him, and that would be the same time frame as initially getting cocci, or at least within a year. And there was an article that Chad had written, Chad and or Robin, probably both of them together, contributing different pieces, had in Reptiles Magazine in what was probably late 98, early 99, talking about those, or maybe it was even just sort of a highlight within the issue or within the article or whatever. And, that was obviously fascinating. They weren't accessible to me at that point, right? I think they were $5,000 for a reverse trio. That's another thing we can talk about, in terms of the why reverse trio and things. But that was completely beyond my means. I had no accessibility to that. As I said, when we got the group, then I think it was situated so it was probably that same price point for literally all 15 of them, something like that. You know, that's sort of a difference. And yeah, so it planted the seed, and it's actually, I think it is a great point that you make in terms of like why the things that you like is a lot of the stuff that I have now, the things that I really treasure now are things that were highlighted in those mid 90s to late 90s Reptiles magazines that were the cool, inaccessible things. Jamaican boas, certainly Puerto Rican boas. I know there was an article, I think it's October 98,
I know that article.
where it talks about them, and that I seen that at the time, and you can't get them, and all this stuff. And it's like, definitely planted the seed so that what I have now is stuff that was the cool stuff to have when I was first starting.
Yeah.
I think for people that were doing the herp thing in the mid 90s through the late 90s, that's when I was doing it as well. I had my hiatus from like 2002 to 2016. But when I came back in 2016, there was an article in Reptiles magazine. They were iconic articles. Like they had a very specific format. And it was just take out this species, put in this species. And so and it went beyond a care sheet. But one that was special to me is the one on crested geckos. Because I remember being a senior in high school. And this is before cresteds became like cresties, boop them on the snoot, all that kind of stuff that they have now. But way back then, I remember seeing the first crested gecko I saw on a table was on Don Hamper's table at the Columbus Reptile Show, the All Ohio Reptile Show, and it's burned in my brain the $6,000 price tag on that tailless brown, nothing special brown crested, and that is why in this tank there will forever be a crested gecko, because in the 90s that was like such a thing that you couldn't. Like when they first showed up, I was like, whoa, there's this dragon gecko that looks like an ape. Like, what the hell is this? So there was just an iconic element to those. And I also think it just hit people that are in their 40s and their 30s at a very impressionable time when you're like in high school, early 20s, and this stuff seems completely insurmountable and you couldn't possibly one day have it. And now, all three of us have animals that fill that niche.
I'll tell you, before we move past Reptiles magazine, I have to say, for me, I can still visualize certain covers from back then. Like there was a North American rat snake article that had the yellow rat snake on the front. And I'm a North American rat snakes. That's my jam, right? So, I remember, I loved it. I wore that magazine out. There was one that was a big reticulated python. And it went into different morphs, and it showed a bite on someone's inner thigh. It said it was just a nip, all that. There's plenty of just real nostalgic memories. But since we're on the topic of this, if you're watching this on YouTube, I now have another favorite cover of Reptiles magazine. And it's that one right there that has the first Colubrid Fest on the top. How awesome is that?
Yeah.
And then the big 6-page article on Colubrid Fest. So there we are.
And that's why I think that means so much to us, because when we were in high school, and early college, the first episode first issue that I got of Reptiles, my mom bought it at a grocery store in West Virginia, and it was whichever one had the Uromastics on the cover.
Yep, I remember that one.
And she was a great mother. She took the little insert and filled the whole thing out, and then that's when the rest is history. And one of the things that I did at the university is I bought the whole run, so I have them all. And I just bought the whole run of Vivarium since we're on this off of Mike Crick. He put that up, and I was like, the school needs that, mine. So we have all that stuff, and I make the students read it. But anyway. Moving on.
Yeah, well, in that same vein, right? So I have all the vivariums myself as well, and I have probably that range of 95 through 2005. That 10 years or whatever, all those reptiles as well.
Oh yeah.
With outliers, and then the old. You guys will remember this. The old reptile and amphibian hobbyist, the small one,
the little one, Reader's Digest,
the little one. Yeah, there was Fauna, right, which actually was. Put out Clay Garrett was the editor on that for a period of time. We had talked about it when he had come to the house to pick up some Exo-terra before, unfortunately, he passed away. But those are all great memories. Heck, even talking to Matt Moyle, right? He was the one who had those incredible Euromastics ads, going back to Saurus, that was Matt, and it definitely, as you say, an impressionable time, and it hit right and all those things. I remember thinking, at the time, right, in the mid 90s, that it was like the Reptiles magazine was the one that I found appealing, and then it gets integrated with the Vivarium, right? When they sold it to him or whatever, and it was like, oh, is this a good or a bad thing? And now I look at it and I can't imagine how wrong I was, where it's the Vivarium that I need to have the whole set. That's the kind of the what I appreciate more now. But all of that is certainly resonates with me. So I guess then coming out of that time frame, when I had moved back after a year in New Orleans, then Tom and I, it was full go, man. And essentially at that time, Pro Exotics had more or less stopped dealing in at least they had very much refined their taste in terms of animals that they were buying from Cameron. So there was an opening and opportunity that wasn't, in the early days, it was, Cameron would say, well, you got to pay Robin the VIG, basically, Robin can get it and, whatever. So there was a lot of, at that time, I had Timor pythons for the first of 4 or 5 times. And I was really into blood python mutations, which I still think, I see some of what's happened now. I think that it's probably snakes that live a cryptic lifestyle. The ability to tolerate mutation, within their populations is just so much higher. So it's the same reason that we see it with ball pythons as well. Is they just wind up caked in mud and sitting under the palm fronds and these sorts of things. So it doesn't matter what they look like. In the same way it would for a North American rat snake or a rhino rat. Right? I've never seen one convincingly that wasn't just the standard green job. So green or blue, which is just a spectrum of color, right? So those were my things. And even on the very front end of that, there were ones that, when I couldn't go to Cameron's, I was always telling Robin, hey, you got to get these ones with the pattern in the pattern. Oh, what do you mean? And I'm showing him this stuff. And he's calling them stone bloods that he's, when he's selling them and this sort of stuff. I was super into that. I definitely think they're cool. Those are would be challenging for me to keep now. It is interesting, right? So different snakes there are positives and negatives, and I guess this feeds into the rhino thing. Blood pythons are very easy if you keep a python room where it's perpetually between probably 75 and 85 degrees. More, the more narrow, 78 to 82, then they're super easy. Neonates are easy enough to keep on heat tape in a room that has more fluctuation because their whole body can adequately access that. Adults, juveniles to adults, generally speaking, if you're trying to keep them in a room that has more, fluctuates beyond those temperature extremes, you're going to struggle. I don't think they're physiologically set up to be in a 68-degree room trying to access and warm their core on even a heat pad, something like that. So I think that goes to a lot of the struggle beyond probably keeping them too hot. That's a snake that's easy to keep if you have that very narrow band of temperature. If you don't, they're going to grow to a size where they can't access or utilize the heat in such a way that you're probably going to struggle. And that's why you see those long-term RIs, which are probably also NITO or serpentovirus, that probably in there. We've seen, I know folks had gnarly things where like entire lung, a lung will be shut down, essentially just cease functionality, associated with this. And it in the same vein as the chondro stuff where it's, shipping adult blood pythons, there's these struggles, all this stuff. It fits. I'm confident. I don't know that there's a serpentovirus unique to blood pythons or that is, hosted by blood pythons, but I'm sure there is, based on just sort of the lived experience and how similar it is to the chondro thing. Contrarily, right, what makes rhinos great is that they're the exact opposite. I've seen it, so when I went to law school in Michigan, I was keeping in a poorly sealed basement of a house, 100-year-old house. And so I can tell you that at 38 degrees, they're active. They move very slowly, but they're active. Even to, pull open the tub, obviously this is sort of being during a cooling period, But yeah, open the tub. It's responsive, moves very slowly over, and does the traditional. I hate to say that we'll get into this, but traditional goniosoma, true goniosoma, to me, Oxycephalum and Jansseni, they'll stick their tongue out and they just leave it out there, and they love flicking it up and down. That's their deal. They love to do that. Rhinos don't do that, but at 38 degrees they do it, and they'll hang it out there for 14, 15 seconds. Just checking it out. So simultaneously, I know for a long time they had a reputation, or were considered to be difficult in terms of concerns that if they get over 80 degrees, they won't do well. Well, I can tell you that, I have ambient room temperature will get 85, 86 in the middle of the summer, hottest part of the summer. They do kind of estivate out of it a little bit. They're generally less inclined to eat those sorts of things at that time of year, but it certainly won't kill him. I mean, if you keep, as I've had happen, if you put him, if even with you in the car, I'm literally driving them, but it was in my 95 Chevy pickup that didn't have AC, and they were on the floorboard behind me, in midsummer. I've had them cook going from Cameron's to, Tom's place. So in 45 minutes, so I'm not that, and that's obviously true with anything, right? A maximum temperature is obvious. A high maximum temperature is going to be a problem for any snake, just in terms of their physiology. But I've had them. I had sent one, so they're weird to sex, and we can talk about that a little bit too. And I know I'm all over the place. It's just sort of what's front of mind. But they're weird to sex. I had sold what I thought to be a female. I think it actually still was, but I think what it might have been we can get into it in terms of there are some gender bender ones that you can occasionally run into, and I think that's a product of them maybe being temp sexed, or at least having a genetic sex that can be overridden, and you can get some weirdness out of it, where essentially this was an animal that, for all intents and purposes, they are sexually dimorphic, was a female, but maybe not female enough to produce eggs.
I got you.
So anyway, I got that one sent back to me. It got, it was, again, so I'm living in Michigan at this point. It's probably 10 degrees outside in a snowstorm or whatever, and it wanders around on the truck for an extra 12 hours that it should have. And I mean, you could, if you hit it on the table, it was ostensibly frozen. It warmed up and was just fine. So yeah, I mean, they're super hardy. I think, again, probably functions of where they live, right? So I think they live in a super volatile place, where blood pythons on the opposite end live within these very narrow constraints. So super hardy to keep. In general, they're the sort of thing that is very tolerant of all sorts of different approaches, that you can have, I guess, in terms of how much water you're giving them versus not water. I guess the only thing would be if you're on the high end of water provision, or you live in a humid place, you need to make sure that's well drained, which I think reflects kind of where they're from naturally. They're karst environment critters in rainforest, but that's super draining. And so they are susceptible to that skin infection that I alluded to earlier that caused Pro Exotics to say, hey, you want to try and take this project on, that sort of deal.
All right. So on that token, where are they from? Because I realized that there's a lot of people don't realize where their snakes are coming from. And the origin point for rhinos is pretty cool. And then, if you don't mind, while you're on that same token, just kind of talking about how they got here.
Yeah.
The origin really of rhinos in North America. So, because that's a cool story.
Absolutely. So they're from far northern Vietnam into southern China. In Vietnam, they're on Cat Ba Island. They're in Tam Dao National Park. They're sort of Hanoi to the north, principally northeast from Hanoi into China, in Guangxi province, and then they're on Hainan Island, which turns into its own conversation in 2021. So the original captive animals were collected between 1993 and 1995 as part of the Russian Academy of Sciences in conjunction with Vietnamese institutions, and by the mid 90s, right, also the U.S., right, things had thawed, so the U.S. is involved in some of this. But they collected what I think are the first ones that are known to, certainly the first ones whose descendants are still around in captivity. Kind of the first known specimens. Those went to the Tula Exo-terra. They went to Klaus Schultz, and those were kind of the progenitor stock for what was rhinos in captivity, both in Europe and the United States, from 97, let's say, until 2005 when we started getting some wild-caught Chinese animals coming in. Cameron, that would be within our Cameron buying phase, and he turned up randomly one day with 8 of them, and I could tell off the rip, so he's got them all in a 10-gallon tank, and I just said, oh, okay, yeah, cool, and he had to run out somewhere. So Ryan Burke, who's now Clockwork Reptile and thing, he's known in the community, was there, and I think, well, I kind of conjoined 2 things. So the first one was 5, and looking at them, it was 4.1, but I was like, okay, I'm going to take, I'll just take all of them. And then in classic Cameron fashion, 2 to 4 weeks later, he turned up with yet some more. So it was the first ones in, living memory that it turned up that were like that were wild caught. And then 2 to 4 weeks later, he turns up with some more. So across those 2 things, it wound up being 8 of them. And so in that second batch, there was a female. And I just said, from 10 feet away, I was just like, oh, I'll just take that one. And that was the time it was just Ryan there. And so I had left. And Cameron called me when I was 10 minutes down the road. And he said, get your ass back here, man. And I was like, I didn't even touch him. I just picked it out I didn't even have to touch it. I just knew the one I wanted. And so, I wound up buying all the rest of those 2. And interestingly, it was probably 3 or 4 years before he got any more. There was one shipment that he had gotten, which is not to say there were no other ones. I know Tom Crutchfield brought some in that turned into kind of the other line or population from wild caught stuff that was around. That would be like 2008, 2009. Cameron got one shipment, but it was a mangled shipment where they had like dropped it on the, somehow one crate crushed the other one or whatever. And it was one of the animals that sort of survived that process. But I got that one as well. And all that stuff is represented in the animals that I work with now. Additionally, in last summer, Dan Maliri, and you'd seen it kind of in the videos, and then Schmitty was the one who had pointed out, because at this point I don't really buy snakes, but Schmitty had pointed out that on Dan's list he had Vietnamese rhinos, which was interesting. So that ostensibly would be the first ones since those original ones that went to Tula and Klaus, and so I picked up it was a humorous moment on that where he was talking, I think he was prospectively going to get the larger ones, or maybe had 1 or 2, and then he had 4 that he had hatched out, and you can actually see him in the video at one point, whatever the timing for this would be. And Dan's like, oh, I can get any number. And I was like, we had a little back and forth where I was like, well, I'll take as many as you can get. And he's like, well, don't tell me that, because I'll bring in more than you can get. And I was like, I'll be very surprised, because throughout, I guess, the definitional history of these things, I don't think they're that easy to locate and find, because they've never really come in more than a quantity of, 8 or 10 at one go, regardless of kind of who was getting them, and often much less than that. And that wound up being the case with these ones from Dan too. I think he wound up being able to get 3 pair. So he was kind of imagining he could get as many as you want, and I was like, okay, well, I guess call my bluff. I won't get more than 5 pair. And then, he wound up being able to get 3. So,
did you get them all?
Yeah.
Or no? Okay, cool. So then you kind of are the like, I don't know, the stud bookkeeper in the private sector for rhino rats in North America.
Yeah, and certainly I've been conscious of that throughout, in terms of saying like, okay, keeping lineage, and even a big part of that, right, beyond just sort of the random chances Schmitty had that Dan was able to get these or was going to bring them in, and that Schmitty highlighted it, so I happened to see it when I otherwise wouldn't have. I know there was conversation, you and Matt, and maybe when it was the 3 of you, right? So maybe when Matt was still on, you guys had talked through. Matt talked about rhinos quite a bit, and as a part of that conversation, it was like, okay, is it all a genetic meat grinder, or do we know what we have, and this sort of thing? And I'm sitting there going, I know what I have, as a podcast, listening to it 2 weeks later or whatever, and so I actually plotted all the things that I have in terms of saying, okay, from founding animals, and then representing in terms of, okay, a individual wild animal would have an alpha character, and then in terms of, okay, to the extent this is that animal times one of its offspring, then it's 2 appearances of that alpha character plus the external one, and figuring it out and trying to, obviously keep that ratio as low as possible. So then the opportunity to get these in terms of these Vietnamese ones was really cool as well. That obviously are totally new characters to that list.
So then, unique opportunity here to talk about the founding stock. How many animals do you think from the wild how do I say what I'm trying to say? I know you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
The founding stock for rhino rats is about how many males and females?
So I would think we're talking single digits of both in terms of the initial, certainly single digits of both on the high end. Like if you're thinking a high number in that would be the high end for those initial Tula and Klaus animals. Really, we're probably talking about 5 pairs, something like that. And that's what made it so cool when Cameron brought those in 2005, is those were, to my knowledge, the first wild rhinos that had entered the United States. And so, that was what made that, why I was willing to buy what wound up being 6.2, right? Is that it was like just the idea that, hey, I can take these, and these are all new animals that you can pair into all this stuff. So even a lot of, in the same way as we see with diamond pythons from Australia and these sorts of things. Oh, well, these are Dallas or Fort Worth Zoo stock. I bought some from Fort Worth Zoo and I got some from Terry and whatever. Those are all just the Klaus animals.
I want to take a quick sidetrack. So for the listeners who don't know who Klaus Schultz is, he's basically the godfather of Asian rat snakes.
Yes.
I mean, he goes further than that. Right. Yeah. Yes, he's passed away. Zac will recommend different books.
I'm getting them now.
There you go. If you can get your hands on any of Klaus's books, they are, so many different species described. And we are so lucky to have so many species in this hobby today because that man went out and found them under a rock.
There you go.
That one right. Oh, yes. That's one of my favorites. It's like the Bible for Asian rat snakes right there.
The first one I bought was in frickin' German, so I have them both.
Mine's in English.
So funny story on that is, so Tom had originally had one, so I'd reread all these things at that same time. So early 2000s, Klaus actually had a website, Bushmaster. So he was the German version of Bushmaster. He and because he was just basically, he and Cameron had this relationship where he was sending the stuff into the U.S. and that sort of thing. So his was the Bushmaster.de. For the German, web ending. And, his website, again, speaking of what made rhinos cool, he had on his page, he always called him the last unicorn. So I definitely fully remember that. So anyway, Tom had the original Bible, and I had fully read that and all. And then do you guys have exposure to, or remember the Rat Snake Foundation, which would go back to 2007, 2008, 2009, that period of time. So I was actually, helping Sue was involved with that. That was the endeavor was a great idea. I talked to Sue a lot. Back in those days, I think she's mostly out of it at this point. It's been a long time since I've talked to her, but a really cool idea. And at one point they wound up having a contest, right? Where it was like essentially herp, Arcania or whatever it would be, where it was this contest for the Rat Snake Foundation in terms of who could treasure hunt sort of deal, give us the answer, and day by day, and people are falling off and this sort of thing. And ultimately it wound up, so this would be fall of 2008, I think. Myself and I think it was Toby Brock, who you remember from Beauty Snake down in Texas, Beauty Snakes and those sorts of things. He worked with good buddies with John Lasser. Anyway, so Toby and I it just keeps going. After 7 days, it's whittled down to the 2 of us, and then we're 2 weeks later, and it's still the 2 of us. You can't. No one's gonna lose. And ultimately, Sue just said, "We're calling it a tie." The prize was going to be a copy of the book, and she wound up just getting 2 copies, and we each got one. And she said, "It's a tie. You each get a book." But they were shipped from France or whatever, so it came in this air postal book, bag from France and these sorts of things. But the copy I have now is that one. So I just thought that was fun.
Nice, very nice, very nice.
Cool. So that was a great little nugget of history and everything. So if we can jump into, well, let's just quickly, we've got to do it. We have to do it. So there was one rhino, and now there are two. And then there were, what was it, 3 genera? And then there was one, and now we may be back to 4 with this new paper that came out. The paper is a preprint, and I don't know if it's gone through peer review yet. That I'm trying to figure that out based off what you sent me, Rob.
Yeah, I see. So the part that was interesting to me associated with I think because this is the taxonomic third rail for me, at least going back to 2014 with the Chen paper, and so I wasn't even aware of this, and then Schmitty mentioned it. Justin Smith of the Herpetoculture podcast, right, mentioned, oh, there's this paper thing, and then they were going to talk about it on Snakes and Stogies or something, and they may have. I haven't heard it yet, if they have, but it was that prompt that made me say, oh, maybe I should, before coming on with you guys, I give it a read. So I guess the context for this for me is, so going back to 2014, and honestly, I to some extent took the Chen paper as my penance, because I hadn't, she had asked me for samples of black jansenii, and I hadn't collected them in sufficient time for them to be provided. Like, I didn't have the animals at that point, and I was trying to get them from other people to be able to send them, wasn't able to do it. And I don't think they had black jansenii samples within the paper. And so that I sort of was like, oh, this paper coming out and drawing the conclusions that it did is my penance for not having come through on that, is sort of how I took it, because so this isn't the one that's pulled up, right? This is the new one. But
yeah, this is the new one.
Essentially, the Chen paper took what at that time was 6 snakes, so Oxycephalum and Jansenii, Margaritatus, which is the Bornean, the incredible Bornean snake, and Prasinum, Prasinum, and then Boulangerii and Frenatum, and just said, well, essentially that paper in 2014 looked at the genetic samples they had, which was variable, and as I say, as I wasn't able to help fulfill it, there was an absence relative to the black jansenii, and just said, well, we think they're close enough. We don't, sort of ideologically, their approach, as they acknowledged, they said, well, if you look at the data, you could do one of 3 things. The first being you could just lump them, call them Oligonyosoma, essentially reflecting that view would reflect a preference to not have lots of genera with only 1 or 2 species. The second option was, I don't even remember the second one that well. The third one comes in here and essentially is saying, well, we should recognize that these things are indeed different. And I guess, in terms of time scale and what we talk about in taxonomy that can make it a little bit troubling for me is saying, well, the youngest of that group are Boulangerii and Frenatum, and that split is 7.5 million years ago.
Yeah.
To me, that's a long freaking time, and it's really presumptuous to say, oh, that's not enough to be to be different, or whatever, That whereas that whole group is 20 million years old, and it originated with Oxycephalum. So there is, and I did take some notes out of this paper, Zach, and we can walk through them. Well, but the sort of the big picture view is saying that the third option was, hey, let's recognize that these things are different rather than just calling them all the same because you think a genera should have lots of species rather than having lots of species that are within a nested clade with only 1 or 2 species. This paper, on the other hand, literally says, essentially beyond going into sort of the descriptors of the different species, including 2 new species that have been described since 2014, essentially literally just says we choose option 3, and that our advocacy is to, whereas you presented those as different options and you said, hey, we choose option 1, we don't agree that that's the appropriate taxonomic approach to take. And that's what I've been saying for the last 11 years. It's just, and Zach, I thought, so you were just on with us for our Grilling the Expert on Heterodon on Reptile Fight Club. That would have just come out. Hey, I've gotten a ton of great feedback around that. So, kudos to you. You really, effectuated that in the way that I had hoped. But on there, you mentioned, when we were talking about taxonomy and what happens in your crayfish work in terms of saying you can read a paper, say, I come to a different conclusion, disagree with it, and not follow the recommendation therein. That might mean you're putting out a paper yourself, or it could just mean in your daily practice it doesn't change how you label your specimens, right?
Yeah, no.
And that's what I've been saying since that paper came out, is that to me, I didn't find it compelling. I chose option 3, and that's okay. So that my view within the world was just saying, I can hold this opinion. I didn't necessarily proselytize it, in the world. If people asked me it, they said, hey, what's your opinion? I'd say, I think Rhynchophis is a real thing. The weird part to me, so Heinenensis is new. What I would actually say, and maybe, were I given this paper to peer review, just based on 25 years of exposure to the snakes, to me, Phrenatum should be within Rhynchophis. So now recognizing Heinenensis, what it actually would be is Boulangerie, Heinenensis, and Phrenatum would all be Rhynchophis to me. Because, well, and this we'll come back to the paper, I promise. But as one aside associated with that very first group that Cameron had brought in 2005, one of those males came in with a damaged rostral appendage. And it was like half hanging off. So that on its first shed in captivity, it shed it off completely, and it just had it looked great. It turned out great, but I still have photos of that. I can send it to you, Zach, and I promise that if I said, what is this? You'd say that's a Phrenatum.
Because the horn's gone? Yeah.
Because the horn's gone, and it's a profile shot. If I send it to you, you'll say, oh, that's a weird looking Phrenatum. Did it rub its face? And that would be the answer. And so, I mean, it's not only that they look similar and that kind of understates it, right? But it would just be the head and eye structure between Phrenatum and Boulangerie, super similar. Scalation features, super similar. Body form and morphology, super similar. The characteristics of their eggs, Oxys and Jansseni lay these much closer to a chicken egg, or more like a beauty snake, an Orthriophis egg, whereas, Phrenatum and Boulangerie have these elongated, very soft eggs. Both of them, weirdly, ontogenic change, born gray babies with black and yellow and white inclusions. Those to me go together, and this is before Heinenensis. So I guess that would be my one update to this paper if they asked me, which they didn't. That would be my feedback, is saying rather than putting Phrenatum into Radenophis, so long as it works, then, in terms of what the genetics show, although, again, raising yet another issue, right? And maybe an issue with the Chen paper. We talked about this on Fight Club, right? What their work reflected conclusions based on 1 mitochondrial and 5 nuclear genes. That was the extent of it. And they said, sure, so Gonyosoma described 1893, Rhynchophis 1897, Radenophis, I think, similar time frame. But the point was something that had been recognized as distinct, save there was in 1931, a Chinese institution tried to describe them as a new thing. Proboscidophis versicolor, save, being duplicate described 35 years too late, associated with that again, but again, recognizing sort of the meets and bounds of tech. And it's amazing that hasn't happened more often, or at least maybe my focus is this, so I just see it more clearly. But, to say we're going to get rid of a taxonomic, a name, right? The name Rhynchophis, the definitional thing for this snake, we're going to get rid of it. It's going to be deferred to the thing that was 4 years older, based on 6 genes. To me, again, my views then being expressed in this paper, with unclear status from 2024 at this point, is, I can just choose option 3 and say, no, I choose to recognize why Oxys are not Boulangerie, and say, okay, I guess in this context, what the paper really does is assign a tribe, which a higher level classification, recognizing how they are related, but choosing to recognize how they are distinct. going into what the taxon naming criteria, right? You have to have monophyly, clade stability, and phenotypic diagnosability. Well, oxys and Boulangerie, you don't have that. Whereas by having Rhynchophis different from Gonius, the true Gonis, Oxycephala jansseni, however black jansseni fit into that, those are distinct entities. If you see one, even with a blindfold, you hold one, you know how they feel.
Their head structure is very unique.
Head structure is unique. They have the ability to puff air, retain air within their throat to expand their throat. Boulangerie, Frenatum don't have that. So there's fundamentally they're not the same snakes. And so to me, my preference would be to retain a naming convention that would show those distinctions, promote those distinctions, and talk about literally tens of millions of years of genetic divergence, as opposed to just saying, well, I think, genera should have at least 6 species, or it's, we're parsing it too finely. Well, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree.
Here's what I like about this paper, and I highlighted it. So I'm going to read this for the people who can't see that are driving. First line in the abstract. Based upon the latest molecular phylogenies of Jonosoma sensu latu, which just basically means like the classic definition of Jonosoma, we recovered 5 clades with robust support. We utilized morphological characters to demonstrate the distinctiveness of each clade, resulting in the resurrection of 3 genera, Goniophis, Rhynchophis, and Radinophis, and propose a new genus and new tribe. So I've done this as a scientist, and this is a great talking point for all the people that get extremely angry when a new tree or new genetics thing comes out, and they're like, damn it, all the names have changed. There's opportunity there, folks, and I'm looking at you, Clint. Because I've said this. I said this on Fight Club. I've said this before. When a person writes a paper and they put out the data, those phylogenetic trees that are in those manuscripts, that's literally data. And these individuals, I think I've had a whopping 2.5 minutes. So I could be wrong. I'm saying that. Okay. But they, I think, looked at pretty much the same tree that led to the previous hypothesis where we're going to glump them all together, because they didn't have access to genetics. There's no genetics that I could see in this paper. There's no new phylogeny. And they're essentially saying, yeah, we got a different hypothesis on how to interpret this. I feel like this is what we need to do. Instead of everybody getting their pitchforks and torches and jumping up and around like rabid baboons pissed off at the universe. Sorry, Clint. Take a second, learn a little bit about how to interpret a tree, and then see if your hypothesis is supported with the data that's being presented. And Rob, that hypothesis, these guys saw basically the same hypothesis. They looked at the tree. I believe they have the ability to interpret said tree, and they're putting out into the universe another way to look at it. I personally have described two species of crayfish, and I didn't do a speck of genetics. Somebody else did the genetics, and they published the tree. And I looked at the tree, and they included the species I was working on. And I basically looked at that and was like, holy hell, those things are monophyletic off on their own. And they included all these other, oh my gosh, I got a new species. I named a blue crayfish that way. And then I named an animal, if you're on the East Coast, it takes up the entire New River Basin, which goes from West Virginia, all of Virginia, and a little part of North Carolina. And, I was able to look at the tree, interpret the tree, and came up with an alternate hypothesis. It got through peer review. We got a new species. So, but yeah, kudos to Justin Smith, because I too totally stole this from the Herpetoculture podcast. I was listening to the Mold King episode today, and he just kind of briefly mentioned the Gonosoma paper, and I was like, say what? We're having Rob on today. This is too good. So, anywho. So yeah.
So
then we have
the same episode that I heard. I would say, Zach, that I think in this context, it's even a step back from saying, reinterpreting the tree. Literally, the part that I think made that Chen paper so third rail for me is that the paper itself that does the description literally presents the argument that is presented in this paper. They just say, yeah, we choose option 1. They make the argument themselves and just say, but my paradigm, sort of my paradigmatic approach to taxonomy means I choose option 1. And that's what made it so maddening to me when people would say, no, they're Gonyosoma now. And I would say, I know what I probably know the paper you're referring to better than you do. And it says in there, it makes an argument that I can choose this interpretation. It literally says I can choose that interpretation. It's just not the one they're choosing.
Yeah. Yep. No. Welcome to taxonomy, everybody.
So at this point, I'm going to say to our listeners, if you are one of the listeners that considers yourself a hardcore science nerd, you are welcome for the last 30 minutes. If you are a casual hobbyist who is interested in keeping rhino rat snakes, the next 20 minutes is what you tuned in for. Okay?
Oh, my goodness.
Now we're going to move into rhino rat snake care. Okay. No more science papers. No more tribes.
Yep.
We're now going to learn how to take care of these damn things. Okay.
There we go. So how do we take care of them, Rob?
Yeah. So honestly, they're super easy with 2 qualifiers to that. The first would be starting babies and getting them to eat mice is a challenge for sure. So the hope would be that if you're getting one from someone who has started it well, and at a minimum, to the extent that and that could even mean 6 to 9 months, that they can, some of them eat pinks right away. Their body form, they're relatively thin when they hatch out. So they hatch out basically as pencils, and well, I don't know whether this is the place to start or not, but in terms of issues, right, we'll probably get there later, but
sure.
In terms of issues you could run into is when they're small, they can be, they eat fish, and I think mostly probably tadpoles when they're born in the wild. So there is some level of, there does need to be some convincing to get them to eat mice. That being said, the evidence that I've seen, the literature speaks to them eating rodents as adults in the wild. So they do have a natural transition. So it's not like you're dealing with something like a male Solomon Island tree boa that in the wild will never get large enough to not eat skinks. So it will always want to eat skinks. And if you run into sort of a time fast and these sorts of things, you might have to encourage it. The sort of definitional experience for folks should be that their rhinos will go from being maybe difficult to get to eat rodents to flying out with a great zeal to eat rodents at every opportunity. So that's sort of a qualified potential problem, and actually becomes its own, I guess, in that same way. The issue then inverts that I think most people feed them too much. So that becomes its own potential problem. So feeding, either in terms of getting them to eat, or then you as the keeper being the problem, the Italian grandmother problem, and feeding them too much food, I have plenty of thoughts on that if we want to get there eventually. But, and the other thing, and the thing that is will actually kill them is essentially being exposed to wet, to constant wet.
Yeah.
That is really the definitional problem. So if they are constantly wet, they will pop skin blisters, in the same way that we see with carpet pythons and this sort of stuff. And they seem, I don't know, I haven't had opportunity to have it occur and get it cultured or whatever. So I'm not sure what it is, but holy heck, man, they will pop it, and and you need to take it seriously or it'll kill them.
Yeah.
If you do, right, conditionally, if you can get them through it, they'll shut it off and they'll do fine. So it's not that those animals are now, long-term problematic, but man, you have to respond with your keeping to what they're telling you, or they will die.
So the babies are the ones that are eating the fish. With the setup, when I had rhinos, I've tried rhinos twice. The first group I got from Andy, PJ knows Andy, and then I got some from the Zirkles, actually. I traded false water cobras for rhino rats. And I had set them up in tubs Rubbermaid tubs, put them on top of my enclosures. I didn't want to put them in a rack because I was afraid of ventilation, and just popped a million ventilation holes in there. And then I actually went so far, I treated them like baby chondros. I kind of went a little bit nuts. And so I put in, holes, then went outside, got some sticks and pushed them through. So they had plenty of perches over top of their little dish. I was convinced that they were going to they were just going to choose death and not eat, because that was my history with babies. I went and got the Rosy Reds, the classic thing, put them in there. And all four, I started with 2.2. All four, first time, boom, ate the Rosies. And then fast forward next week, I did the trick where you put the Rosies in a pinky, dead pinky, went in, they look like Nerodia when they eat, by the way. They do that side thing, which, Zac Loughman should love these things. Grabbed the pinky mouse, it slammed it, all four ate. And then they just were kind of ripping and roaring. And the blisters, I have something to talk about with the blisters. So I went away on a trip, and this happens every freaking time. Most of my field trips, when I leave to do research in the summer, I purposely limit them to 5 days. A day of travel, 3 days in country, a day to get home, and then the grad students are there longer. And part of that is the animals. I don't want to be gone more than a week, especially when things are being laid and hatching and blah, blah, blah. And I had to go away on a trip where I was away for 10 days. And I told my son, now he was only 12 at the time, so it's not fair for me to put this on a 12-year-old. You've got to check all the snakes. Well, he didn't check the rhino rats because they were out of sight, out of mind. And I'm pretty sure I fed them, they ate. One of them regurged into its water bowl, flipped that regurged water bowl, and then cracked. And so it turned into this disgusting, sloppy mess. And when I came home, it was just covered in the blisters, which looked like human pimples full of pus. And I thought, oh my God, this thing's doomed to death. And just like you said, I immediately got it out. I dried it out. I gave it its perches. Felt horrible. It was in a shed. It was going into a shed by the time I got home. Shed it all out, and it looked perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong. And those animals I since have given to Justin Smith, THP, and I believe that those are his founders. So, and they've bred for him and done everything. So, but when I saw the degree of blisters, and I've dealt with blisters with nature scenes before, but good God, I was like, Jesus, this thing's dead. There's no way it's going to survive. And it was totally fine. So, then in fact, there wasn't even scarring. It shed and it was just done. So I can speak to that as well, because I had it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you could carry them to a shed, then they'll be all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, what does your setups look like?
So now, not the show sponsor or whatever, what I've moved to, so you can keep them, in the same way as Greg Maxwell talked about in his book, right? He was like, well, this is my recommendation for a chondro, or whatever. And he's like, simultaneously, I could keep them in a 5-gallon bucket with a screen lid and a light on it, Right. You can do a whole ton of different things depending on your variables, your preferences, those sorts of things. What I'm doing now, what I'm shifting towards, just for my own enjoyment, really, is utilizing a Zoomed 13.5 by 31.5 by 17.5 display, caging, and keeping one of them, single animals in those. That size was just defined by really my room requirements, room capacity, in terms of, I figured out the one bummer of those cages is they don't nestle neatly into either baker's racks or other, racking, this sort of thing. So it was like, well, what's the largest thing that I could fit onto the most number of those, a baker's rack that I could buy? And within my room, then it was like, okay, well, I can set up 1, 2, 4 of these things. And then what's the largest cage that would then make sense in this? And so that's kind of where, what I wound up with based on my configuration. That being said, I've also kept them in the Vision hatchling tubs, the CB30, the 35s that are double wide, the 28 quart tubs. I mean, any of those things, but kind of where I'm at in terms of keeping style and my own enjoyment. These are diurnal snakes. You know, in midsummer, they'll be crepuscular and into early evening. But man, talk about a snake that generally speaking will want to sit out and display for you and interact with you. You know, and after keeping them in tubs for 20 years, save maybe a pair or two or whatever, it was, hey, I want to be able to see all of them. You know, I have you know, I want to have a whole room that's just these things out and about crawling around. And it's been really interesting to be able to observe that since I made that shift. And part of that cage thing, we can get into it, you know, or not, but was I wanted to recreate the environment of Tam Dao and Cat Ba Island, which again, so it's this limestone karst. I got the thin universal rock background, put that on there to speak to the limestone karst. And then it was like, okay, I want everything that's in the cage to at least be to the general level what's on or what is in either Tam Dao, right, the source of the original animals, or Cat Ba, which is, if you go on iNaturalist, that's where like 2/3 of the records are from now. So those are definitive places associated with these things. And the cool thing with that was there's actually, so we talked about, right, the Russian Academy of Sciences trip in the trips 93 through 95 that were the progenitor stock for the original animals. Well, back on the 1986 one, so this was the Soviet expedition with the Vietnamese, the U.S. wasn't involved. They collected in Tam Dao an Asian violet, Charita tamiana, maybe now it's Dinostigma tamiana, but it's this Asian violet. And, you know, as I'm looking through trying to find, okay, well, what live plants could I put with these things? Well, in Tam Dao, the same thing in 1986 collected these violets that then were propagated in the UK and whatever. So this thing literally, not only is it from the same place, it's actually from the same expedition, only, you know, 7-8 years earlier. And it's like, well, that's so cool. So it's just, you know, Tam Dao with the karst, Cat Ba, and to me, so my one cheat is that I love cork bark. I think it's so, to me, it's the ultimate husbandry tool, you know, in terms of what would you say, you know, is to me, it's cork bark. And so I put in a sort of the artificial bottom, so not the Leica balls, but the sort of foam filter bottom to ensure good drainage on this. I have a soil layer, and as part of that soil layer, there's a hidden piece of cork bark that then is beneath the soil as well. And then I have leaf litter that, you know, it was all okay, at least to the general level. This plant has to, and now, you know, plants are so much more transitory, right? We have invasive plants and all these things, but can I find, at least to the general level, this leaf litter in either Tam Dao or Cat Ba now, and then it's okay. Then it'll go in there and, you know, create this mix over the top, and it's worked out great. And but there's this, you know, hidden cork bark piece that then is sort of their subterranean hide. And I tell you what, they use that. I have bamboo poles that then are giving them verticality at the top of the enclosure. I have the luminized bulbs, so, you know, throughout the day they're getting the changeover, the whole thing. No UVB, we can get into that, but you know, in terms of why not relative to my setup and those sorts of things, I know that's always a discussion, but that's basically the outline. It's basically just a glass tank with a luminized bulb over the top. Picture some pieces of bamboo there. Got the cork bark that provides the structure for that subterranean hide, a water bowl, and I love to use the sort of the smaller medium dog bowls, and then I put in the 8-ounce water cup that fits perfectly into there, and I, you know, just replace the water bowl, you know, or replace the liner, functionally the liner, and I mean that's it, man.
Do you give any kind of basking area?
I was just going to say no basking area.
Well, so the bamboo poles get them up to that luminized bulb, but other than that, no. They don't have any additional heat inputs that are on the room. The room throughout the year, well, I mean, we had the power go out in December or whatever, and it went down into the upper 50s. But generally speaking, at the coolest time of the year, it's going to be in the low 60s, something like that. And in the warmest time of the year, the ambient temperature, and again, this is a temperature at chest height, and these things, you know, kind of throughout the room or whatever, will be, I think the lowest it had been before the power outage was 63 in there, and then the highest it had been was 86.5, 87, something like that.
Cool. Yeah, I have a trio, and it's an adult male. My females are yearlings. The yearlings are still in a rack system currently, waiting for them to get a little bit more size on them.
the adult male we actually have on display on the floor here in the shop, and I keep them in a Exo-terra 36 by 18 by 36, and same thing. I've got luminize on ours, and we have, but I do provide a basking area as well, and I want to say, so the ambient temperature in here is typically around 74, in the shop. Now that is in the path of the front door. So, I mean, if there's drafts, it's going to come through on that particular wall. So it's, anywhere between 70 to 74, but I put a low wattage. I think we have maybe a 60 watt bulb, in there, but I give a perch that can take them all the way to the bulb, or down. And I find that he does utilize it. He'll do it sometimes he's not, sometimes he's completely away from it. Sometimes he's on the floor. He'll utilize that entire cage. But I was just curious if you do, because I see occasionally where he will go bask under it.
I think, again, it's more the constraints of the setup right now. Based on, okay, I don't really have the height to be putting that in because I have the 3 stack or whatever. Yep. I don't think it's a bad idea, and I could offer heat pads and those sorts. You can do that, and certainly keeping them on top. Again, I've probably done most everything you can with these things, and they're tolerated most everything that you can throw at them.
And kind of to your point of doing, what we can is. The reason I did it is so like the babies, the yearlings that are in the rack system, there's no additional heat. I don't put anything additional on them. But with this, I figured there's so much space that he'll tell me if it's a problem. You know what I mean? If he doesn't want it there, then he won't go to that corner ever. And, the fact that he does, I'm like, okay, it's just an added benefit that he can, thermoregulate however he wants. So just and it's funny you mentioned Phrenatum as well. So the Rains rat, we did the same thing. I've got a pair of them set up in the nursery, and I was seeing courting. I cohab them, and I was seeing courting behavior throughout the winter, and everything. Whenever I believed I was just going to have it during the spring, but male was courting, and Ox had mentioned that the male had gone off feed for a few weeks, and I go, throw a lamp on him. It's do that, put a lamp on him. And I think that'll do it. He put a basking lamp on because, again, we weren't doing anything in the nursery for him. Put a basking lamp on him, and boom, 2 days later, he's like, oh yeah, both of them are feeding. The male's eating again. And now I'm watching the female who she looks plump already, and she's just basking constantly, underneath there, absorbing that, on species I really wouldn't expect it from, but there they go.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really cool. Well, yeah, remind me, we can talk about, noticeable swelling and those sorts of things. We'll talk about that for sure. There's some interesting stuff.
No, well, let's just move on to breeding. So there's 2 things that I want to cover. One thing before we get to putting male and female together is males together. I've got a fun little story. So I had a guy, always a tattoo shop, who basically reached out to me and was like, I got a pair of Rhino Ratsnakes. I'd like to trade them to you for a false water cobra. And I was like, done. I only have 250 of them. So, we're going to give rhinos a second try. This was my second try. So I went to the shop. I know the guy. He's a good keeper. The exchange goes down, false water cobra. I get the pair of rhinos, bring them to the house, actually set them up right over here where the hognose are going to go. In these 2x2 by 15 PVCs. They were juveniles. They weren't adults yet, but they definitely weren't babies. They had their full color. And I'm, raising them, and they're doing okay and everything. And I, decided I want to move them on. And it was right around the time Lucas was set to graduate with his master's degree, another MPR Network host, Carpets and Coffee. And so, he said, do you have anything? That's what all my herp grad students say to me. And I was like, well, actually, yeah, I got a pair of rhinos. Oh, I really want rhinos. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to send you rhinos. And so I sent them. And I don't remember how they ended up cohabbing, but they were cohabbing. And Lucas sent me this message. And he's like, I'm paraphrasing, but so were they trying to eat each other? And I was like, no, what are you talking about? these things hate each other. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? Like, it just wasn't registering. And he's like, they're biting each other. Like, oh, well, apparently they were males. It wasn't a pair. And I didn't know that they did any form of combat. So, and these were subadult. Like, there was no way these were sexually mature. And so I ended up sending him 2.0, and I believe he moves one or both or whatever on. I don't know if he contacted you about that or not. But
he had sent me frantic messages.
Yes. Yes. Oh, audio went.
Yeah, sorry about that.
There you go.
That's fine.
So he messaged me that day as he was watching them chase each other around and said, "Hey, is this normal?" And I was like, "Normal for two males," And so we have a couple of things that I think would be worthwhile that I've either alluded to or haven't, to this point, would be they are sexually dimorphic in a couple different ways. In general, a female rhino rat, well, two things. So that dimorphism shows in two different ways. The first is that males get substantially larger inherently. So both of them tend to grow long and thin. Females, generally speaking, will almost grow to their full adult length before they start growing, gaining width at all. So actually, in terms of saying, okay, those were subadult animals, interestingly, it seems like females in general don't start growing in terms of holding girth or maintaining girth, kind of getting more of a bread loaf, look to them. They just grow as circles until they're first exposed to males. And then as soon as they are within a shed cycle, you'll notice that it seems like it almost maybe puts a limit on their maximum growth. And then now they switch modes, transition into, okay, this is the size that I am. So that as much as I might say that, an average length is an average adult length, if you read within either Klaus's newer book or any of this literature, it'll refer to them being 3 foot long at adult, as sort of the adult minimum size. I've had females that instead were only maybe 2.5 feet and stayed at that size and were reproductively active, from that size, but gained that girth. And it's kind of, they, as I say, grow long and lean. When they're exposed to males, those females seem to have a hormone shift that caused them to start gaining girth rather than gaining length. So just sort of an interesting piece. The males will similarly grow long and lean and then start gaining more width, but man, they just grow substantially longer. So in terms of maximum size on those, I think the standard maximum size is conceived to be about 5 feet in males. It really is more like 3 feet in females, maybe 3.5 on a decade plus old animal. I've had them live 15 to 20 years. They do live a long time, at least kept the way that I keep them. And I did have one male that was the original male that Pro Exotics had bought that came from Klaus. So I know, where he came in 98 and 90, so 97 hatchling came in 98, and he got to about almost, 5 1/3, 5.5 feet, or 5 and, somewhere in that range. So males can with, but again, that would be talking about him at 15, 16, 17 years old, something like that, and having been fed more aggressively when he was younger, for sure. So I don't know that that's normative or whatever. The general top end range is about 5 feet.
Cool.
But I guess sorry.
Real quick, your microphone is a little froggy.
Yeah. Audio's acting up.
Is it better now?
No, I don't know what's going on.
Let me leave and come back.
Okay,
because
cool.
It's just someone called my phone, so it's trying to be two places.
I got you. No worries.
Cool.
Rob will be leaving. Well, Rob's gone. You've only kept, you've kept Asian rats forever, but you're just now venturing into rhinos, right?
Correct. Yes. Rhinos are new for me. I didn't get them until Tinley of last year. So the October Tinley.
Cool.
Yep.
All right.
Any better now?
Much better.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Much better.
So let's see. I was going to talk.
So besides dimorph, so we've done dimorphism. So when you're going to breed them, is it in your opinion, the classic recipe of cool to X degree, warm them up, or is it just kind of let them ride a room where there's a drop, or light more important, feeding, cycling more? What's your experience with all the methods?
So, again, having tried all these different things, My current recommendation would be to keep them like people are now keeping diamond pythons, where they have that volatility in the room, and to the extent that you do have cool temperatures, that you're at least giving them some opportunity to raise up out of that. If you just straight bake them so I didn't have problems keeping them in Michigan, in those sort of super cool temperatures, but there was fluctuation, obviously, even there, right, throughout the day. Nothing like being at 5,000 feet, right, where we get so much volatility that actually wound up being the, Stan Cheers was lying about his diamond pythons, and it's like, no, the critical factor was just that it was a garage in Colorado, not a garage in Pennsylvania, and so they were able to, get that manipulation or that variance that kept them alive. When I would just straight bake them, so to speak, at 45 to 50, and they didn't have range, like one a year, I was having a female come out loopy, or one animal a year seemed to come out loopy, as though they're, neurological weirdness that seemed to be that they are not intended to just be a down and solidly down and out for 2 months animal. And I think that's reflective of where they're from, right? They're from this sort of,
they shouldn't be doing that.
Right. In Tamdao, that's not what happens, right? They're going to presumably, it's going to be more like what we see in terms of Colorado herps, where, on nice days, they'll come out and there's fluctuation, and, it's not just a strong, fully down cool. So I think that's probably sort of the approach that I would recommend. If your constraints are such that you don't have the capacity to get them, probably you're not going to have great sperm production and viability below, if you're not at least creeping them below 65 or so for some of the time. So if you can't do that without popping them into a cooler or whatever, my recommendation when people talk to me about that is just, hey, watch them, and try and make sure that you're looking at them and that they're not starting to do weird, get a little jag on you. Because if they are, then you're going to, take, obviously stop while you're behind, not further behind.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
And then do you cohab or no?
So I don't now. I do think it's a great way to keep them. For the most part, most of them will be fine. You can run into, so the natural challenge there, right, and this kind of brings even feeding into play. Clint, like you're talking about with Fernandum, I think you can totally do it. I've totally done it and had success doing it. I have had one male that, Justin Smith did sort of raise this issue as a potential concern he has. I guess he received a really big male, right, that maybe is closer in size to sort of that original one that I had. That I actually don't think that's necessarily a problem, because the only male that I've ever had be a real problem was a later one that had come in from China as a captive, I think it was probably captive hatch, because it was basically hatchling size when I got it. But that animal just was antisocial in the sense that, so speaking of the biting, so they do have a copulatory bite. They have interesting skin. It's very durable. I've seen, I had one, actually the female that then laid the largest clutch that I've ever had. Again, we're back into the feeding thing. So now my recommendation, and I'll close the loop on that, but my recommendation at this point is to feed them nothing larger than hopper mice, not feed them rats at all. And they eat very sparingly over the course of the year, but they eat in spurts where I'll feed them. We'll go a week or 2 weeks where I'll give them effectively between a crawler and a hopper every day. Just give them one a day for, I don't know, a week, 10 days, 14 days, something like that. But really mine eat between mid to late March and mid-June, and then they eat, and some males won't even do that, right? If they're getting feedback responses from the females, in general, like the males that are most switched on or the most willing to not eat, they won't eat between when I stop feeding, more or less mid to late October, and when the last female has ovulated, which could be as late as mid-July. So this particular male that I'm thinking of, I had a male that would regularly not eat for 9 months at a clip, because he wouldn't eat from when I stopped feeding, starting in November, until the last female in the room, not even who he's paired with, last female in the room had ovulated, and that could be as late as mid-July.
Man.
Wow.
Without any noticeable decline in condition.
So with that schedule, you got them together. I never got to breeding, so I don't know with these guys. They do the herky jerky dance, or the males.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
so whatever. To close the loop, I guess the two things that have jumped to mind. The difficulty in cohabbing is when they're in the season where they're going to eat. So, you know, to the extent it's a male that's willing to eat coming out of brumation, then maybe that's mid-March into April for the male. The females will eat. They'll even eat when they're heavily gravid, for the most part, and then they eat once they've laid eggs. So the real heavy feeding season is really the end of July, really beginning of August through October. Those 3 months are when when they'll take probably, certainly the males, they're probably taking 70 to 80% of what they're going to eat through the year. Again, I had one where that was 100% of what he was going to eat for the year. And females, they're probably eating 70% of what they'll have for the year. They'll have 30% on the front end before they'll do that. That being said, back in 2008, I had a Fort Worth Zoo female, a female that had come from Fort Worth that I think I got from Terry. Again, so now being in a context of, I don't feed them larger than hopper mice, you know, spaced, you know, across these days and stuff. Well, I fed her 7 weaned mice and would go. And she was probably 3.5 or 4 at that point, and she ate them. But that last one, I guess I hadn't thwacked it quite well enough, and it bit her, and it pulled her skin away from her body. And the thing with all, you know, it's literally dying breath, was trying its hardest to puncture the skin and couldn't. The skin pulled away from the muscle of the body, but a rodent on full tilt couldn't puncture.
Couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it. Wow. The only thing that I've seen really cause problems to their skin is blisters and the teeth of Rhino Ratsnakes. So that coming back to close the loop, this captive hatch male that would go off food for 9 months, you know, and was totally intense. They breed more like boas. So in terms of, there were a lot of false starts with this species. Kathy Love found them to not work, you know, for her, because they're not like corn snake. They're not traditional rat snakes in terms of how they breed. It's a process. And even trying to use one male over multiple females if they're not in the same cage doesn't generally work, because almost certainly your timing is not aligned with what they're wanting to do. You can certainly spread them too thin and just get a bunch of slugs all over the place. That definitely can happen. So I actually think cohabbing them is great. The only hard part is when they're in the feeding season and you're doing that, you better have 2 hoppers ready to go. You know, as soon as the one, because they'll eat them at different speeds, you better have either another one or be ready to take that one out, because they absolutely will start eating Lady and the Tramp in that, no question at all.
Gotcha.
But that one particular male, the question relative to that, sort of the nature of pairing them and keeping them paired and getting, you know, viability being defined by how long you can keep them together, basically. The question with him always became, is he going to beat them up too badly? That literally with him, it would become, I have to take him out. Even if it means she doesn't produce viable eggs, I have to separate him, because he would just constantly be biting and nipping. And with that species, their own teeth, it looks like he cut them with razor blades. One female that I had paired him with, in the picture of her having just deposited her clutch, you can actually see that there's her muscle, underlying muscle from one of those bite spots is protruding out of her body right around where the eggs are coiled. You wouldn't notice it if you didn't know to look for it. You just see this beautiful clutch of eggs, but literally there's muscle protruding through her skin from one of those spots. So I guess, you know, to circle it to what Schmitty said, I don't think them actually being big means anything, because the largest one that I had was a great breeder who didn't beat up other animals. This one wasn't the largest one, but it was the one that was most intense. And yeah, he's the only one that I've had that really was that bad. But yeah, you put 2 males together and absolutely they're going to start carving each other up, and it's immediately noticeable.
So final question then. You get the eggs. What do you do with the eggs? How do you incubate the eggs? Just put them in a box on top of the cage or incubator?
So given the constraints of my room, what I do is put them on the floor. But yes, in the sense that, when they're incubating, it's the hottest time of the year. And so this, gets us into this. The ideal incubation temperature, I think, for them is about 78 degrees. I had later season clutch where I just had literally back to the 5-gallon bucket full of vermiculite. I had them, half full of vermiculite in the sort of standard way. I do utilize the light grid approach. They can take on too much moisture, and I'm sure that's even more the case in places that have a higher, relative humidity than I have here. At the same time, you need to baby it a little bit. There's a window, there's a Goldilocks zone that you need to keep with them where if they're denting, then either you need to put sphagnum moss over the top, you got to contain it a little bit, whatever it looks like, right? And it's going to vary by your conditions. But in general, I would shoot for 78 degrees and they'll hatch in basically 60 days. That being said, I had this late clutch and it was in yet another different basement where the ambient temperature would fluctuate throughout the day from, the low 70s to the low 60s. And those took between 117 and 121 days to hatch.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
So literally doubled it up. But they hatched and were females. Now, from the earlier promised point, right? So I talked about, Pro Exotics, they were $5,000 for reverse trios. Those were being incubated at between 82 and 84.5 degrees. At those temperatures, you're going to get a lot more birth defects in terms of, you get weird kinking and things. And they were hatching at 2-to-1 at least ratios of males to females. At 78, you basically get some of both. In the one instance where I had them super cool, I got all females.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, and Porphyracia do the same thing. The same is true. The same exact thing is true. Yeah. And marketed in the same way, where when they first came in, it was like, who knows why, but we always get 2-to-1 males. And you got to buy multiple males and all these things. Males were cheaper, all this stuff.
I definitely find more kinking in Porphyracia when they're at that 80-degree mark versus 78, for sure.
So for me, it's always about keeping them cool. So I wouldn't put them on the top of the room. I put them on the
down
floor,
the ground.
And that's just what I do. Without noticeable difficulty. What I have noticed is if you mess with them when they're just coming to hatch, they're definitely something you want to out of sight, out of mind when they're about to hatch, because they will bolt from the egg based on the big scary monkey coming and messing with them, and they'll rip their umbilicus and die. I've had it happen. Absolutely. Yeah, like they will bolt. So that Eric, I know, mentioned this because he had it happen with some carpet pythons, and I was like, put a paper towel over the top of them so they stop looking at you and they'll be fine, and indeed that was true. So it's always dangerous. It's like, I need to know if they're starting to hatch, but if they're in, essentially I'll just leave them in the box for as long as it takes to be convinced that they're all fully out, because I don't want to be messing with them.
Man.
Gotcha.
Well, I feel like we have done a clinic on this species.
I agree.
Is great. We very rarely have hardcore nerdy taxonomy talk coupled with hardcore husbandry talk. So I think the Rhino Rat peeps of the world are going to be pretty freaking happy with this.
Got it all.
So. I mean, I don't know. There's hours more to go, but I think the patience.
We can do volume 2.
But the problem is, right, it's sort of all over the place, in terms of what it would be. I think to close a couple loops that maybe I didn't, beyond size, if a female Rhino Ratsnake should look more or less like a green and white or blue snake. A male Rhino Ratsnake in general will look like a green and yellow snake. So that they'll get it in terms of their the white striping on the face. In females, it's generally going to be a crisp white and or maybe with blue inclusions. If you're looking at, particularly on mature animals, if they have a ton of, basically it just looks like they have yellow stripes on their face, 9 times out of 10, that's a male.
That's cool.
So hatchlings will have that yellow on the face, and it seems to, even hatchling females will have it, and it'll fade out. So hatchlings, it's not determinative, but if you're talking about a color changed animal, so 6 to 18 months, 2 years, something like that, and there you would look at it and say, oh, that's like a yellow and green snake. That's almost certainly a male. They definitely have, and we talked about it on RFC, in terms of the tail shape and structure, they definitely have that. The males have, the sort of classic, in the classic colubrid sense. You can look at it. To me, they're basically, with 95% accuracy, they're visually sexable once they're color changed just by look and feel if you're used to colubrids.
Cool. So here's my final question. You do all this field herping, and I know Eric from Morelia Python Radio has, you go to Australia, Dr. J, all that stuff. Is there ever a planned trip for like northern Vietnam to see your snake? Is that something that's in the cards? Because you go to Asia, there's a lot more colubrids in Asia than there are in Australia. And we kind of have the rat snake guy here from Asia too. So I don't know. But is that something you would want to do or no?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it sounds probably the most convenient way to do it is probably to go to Cat Ba, again, where most people, 2/3 of them are being seen at this point and that sort of stuff. Going back, in terms of really MPR Network sort of shows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or shows or cast of characters or whatever. When Nick and Ryan and Chris Salemi went on their grand tour to Asia rather than Australia, 2 years ago, they went to Cat Ba hoping to see the endemic gecko that's there.
Mm-hmm.
And weren't able to, grand adventure, as is always the case with a Nick trip and this sort of stuff. But they went to Cat Ba, and it was like, man, my basal self, the worst parts of my nature are like, it'll totally destroy me if they wind up seeing one of these things before I do. So, Chris said they did see a green snake, but fortunately there are many, green snake.
There are many green
snakes. Or whatever. There are many green snakes and whatever, so it wasn't claimed and whatever. But yeah, so that does seem super doable and is certainly of interest. It just hasn't been prioritized at this point. But yeah, I'd like to, and I think that's probably where I would go. It seems really doable. There's infrastructure there to support doing it and all, and seems like a really cool place anyway.
Oh, heck yeah. No. Well, you need some travel buddies. If the Python people want to go to Australia again, you got two colubrid nuts right here. So,
absolutely.
There you go. All right, man. Well, this was great. This is exactly what I was hoping it was going to be. So if people are interested in rhinos, they want to reach out to you, they want to listen to you on your podcast, this is your time to plug them away to the colubrid people of the world. So where can people find you?
The easiest place is High Plains Herp on Instagram. I do have rhinorats.com and highplainsherp.com go to the same place. But at this point, I'm mostly using that as a venue to put out my field herping pictures, or at least some of the ones that really appeal to me, and in a way that doesn't, it's not like a Facebook post where it looks like I colored them in with a crayon or whatever. Just the resolution goes to crap. So that's mostly there. I do think I put up my care article, sort of background and care article on the website. So rhinorats.com. I believe at this point one of the links should be, you can read about rhinos, and it'll feed to sort of the most up-to-date version of that article that I put together. And has a lot of what we've talked about, may have some extra things or whatever, different ideas. So that's probably worth checking out. In terms of podcasts, my two principal ones are Reptile Fight Club with Dr. Justin Julender, and Boas with Keith McPeak and Dr. Warren Booth. So yeah, so those are great. The RFC is mostly, we try and do once a week, and Boas kind of, we hope to be on a 4 to 6 week cadence. So yeah. That's the goal and intent.
I love them both. I really like the Grilling the Expert, the new format. I think I was one of the first for that.
You were the first one.
I was the first one for that. Okay.
Yeah.
That was a good one. I enjoyed being on there, but I've enjoyed listening to the subsequent ones as well. So.
Yeah, Joe Mendelson was awesome. We were talking about chytrid, a lot of that Mexican amphibians and chytrid and all that. And then, man, I think you will like the one that we have next. So we recorded them like basically back to back to back. So the next one that'll come out is with Bob Zappalordi on herping and pine barrens. Yeah. And we go into specifics on pine snakes, their nature. I'm sure you've seen he and Dr. Joanna Berger, have a ton of papers they've put out and all that. And we dive in pretty good. I hope. So to me, It's kind of the two that I've led thus far in terms of yours and with Bob.
Oh, cool.
Man,
no, I'm definitely going to hit
they
that.
They were what I hoped for. So yeah, hopefully that one will strike you right.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Rob. We'll finish with our outro here. Clint, where can people find you?
You can always find us at Metazotics.com. You can find us on Facebook at Metazotics. Instagram is MetazoticsLLC. And you can always email us at metazotics@gmail.com.
Okay. You want to find me, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zac Loughman on Facebook. You're interested in grad school, we're still accepting people for the ZooSci program. So zloughman at westliberty.edu. And whatever time of day it is, evening, night, afternoon, or morning, hope you have a good one. This was a fun one. Later, y'all.